All right, guys, here's part 2 out of 3 parts for our walk cycle. So in this lesson, we're going to go over how to finish up the second half of our walk cycle. Next week, we're going to get into smoothing out our interpolation, and then our walk cycle will be complete. And that will be your assignment, is to send me a completed walk cycle. So make sure you're keeping pace on this and not pushing things to the last minute. That can make it just harder on yourself. So work through this. Let me know if you have any questions. But yeah, at this point, let's go ahead and dive into our part 2 of our walk cycle. Intro. Okay, guys, so at this point, we are ready to make our second set of poses. So we need to make frame 17, so that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we only have 5 more poses to make. Cool. So the thing about this week, though, is if you notice on contact frame 1, well, on frame 17, there's another contact, but in this one, our left leg is forward, and in this one, our right leg is forward. So frame 1 is essentially the inverse of frame 17, but they need to match pretty closely, because if they don't, it could get really interesting. Your walk cycle could look a little off. So we need to keep those pretty close. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up with a button that will select frame 1, copy this, and flip it so that we can use it as a guide on frame 17. Okay? And so what we want to do with this is we want to integrate a button that I've made for you guys. Okay? Now, everything in this button will work for any character that you have. The only line of code that you're going to need to change is this top line of code. Okay? And so what we're going to do is you're going to use this code and you're going to generate this top code yourself. Okay, and so the way we're going to do this, and this will work for any rig, okay, is we need to be able to select the geometry. And right now I can't select the geometry. And so I need to come over here, making sure that we're in our channel box layer editor. I'm going to come down here where we have our geo layer, and there's a little R right there. I'm going to click on that and make that go away. And now I can click on the geometry. All right, cool. Problem is, if I select everything now, I also get the curves, and I don't want the curves. So if you guys remember, up here, we have all these little options up here. I want to turn all of this off, except for the geometry. And at this point, if I drag a box around everything, all I'm going to get is the geometry of everything, and this is essentially what I want. So I'm going to come down to our script editor, so I'm going to pull that up. And I want to clear everything out of all of this. And so if you guys remember, this button right here erases everything. So I want to do that. And so I'm going to drag a big box around my guy, and that's going to give me this code. And so what I want to do is I want to come in here and I want to click Control A and Control C to copy that line of code. And then I'm going to come back to this little notepad document. I'm going to delete that first line of code. And then I'm going to do Control V as in Victor and get that back in there. Okay, cool. Now from here, I'm going to do Control A and Control C to get all of this code. I'm going to paste it in here, Control V as in Victor, and now I have the code that I need. And so I'm just going to highlight everything, or you can click Control A, just get all this highlighted down here. And then we're going to go to File, Save Script to Shelf, and let's call this DUP OBJ. And click OK. And now we have a button that's going to work for what we need. Don't click this button yet, because what we need to do before we use that button is we need to come to frame 1, right? Because I'm ready to make frame 17, but I need to come to frame 1 because frame 1 I've already done the pose. So I need to essentially come to frame 1 and copy this pose. And that button is going to copy it for me and invert it, and it's going to be ready as a guide for frame 17. Okay, so on frame 1, I'm going to come up here, I'm going to click this button. Okay, and it's going to make me a duplicated object. As you can see, it's the exact opposite of the pose that I have in there, which is perfect, and that is exactly what I want. So from this point, what we want to do, so, and you can see it right here, right? If you accidentally click off, that little geometry is right here. We want to select that little geometry, and then we want to come over here, and there's a little button right here. We want to click this little button. Or if you like menus, you can do layer and create layer from selected. That's essentially the same thing as that little button. And it's going to make us a layer 1. And now with this layer 1, I want to name it what it is. So I'm going to double click on this, and let's call this frame 17 underscore capital LYR for layer, and click save. All right, cool. And now I can turn the visibility on and off for that. We've essentially made an inverted copy of our guy. And so from here, I want to keep the visibility on. We're going to skip the letter P, and we're going to come to this empty box at the end. And there's 3 states. There's an empty state, there's a transparency state, and then there's a restricted state. So I'm going to go ahead and click that until it says T. All right, cool. And that's exactly what I want. Now, before I move on too much further, let's go ahead and come back down to this geo layer, and let's click in that bottom once, but we don't want T for that. We want to click that until this says R. Okay, so we've got restricted mode back on for that, and we've got transparency mode on for that. So now if I click off, we can see that we've got this little wireframe dude that we cannot select. I can't select him, and so that's good. He's just sitting there as a guide showing me how my guy should be posed. And now I still have notes, and I'm going to still use those notes for to tell me where to put this curve. And actually, I've got all this stuff still turned off, so I'm going to turn all this back on. Okay, and so the notes are going to tell me like what the values of this should be, the values of this. So we can still refer to the notes that I've given you guys, but essentially this wireframe is going to be super helpful with telling my legs where to go and my arms where to go. Okay, and so let's go ahead and make sure that we're on frame 17. So I'm going to click on frame 17. We've got this matched up to frame 17, and now we have a little wireframe guy in here too. And so let's go ahead and start matching him up to that. And so what I'm going to do, again, like normal, I'm going to click this little bottom curve, and I'm going to work from the ground up. And so from here, I'm going to pull this, my root down to negative, like around -2 or something like that. So we'll do -2, and then I'm not really going to push that over right yet, so I'll put 0 on X. And so those are the numbers for this big root. Okay, and then so for the legs, I'll zoom in over here too. I'm going to match these legs up to match this little wireframe dude. So match this up. And so I can see like that little heel right there. So I'll match that. Again, remember not to accidentally do that kind of stuff. I'm going to match that up as best I can. And it doesn't have to be perfect, okay? But it needs to be pretty close. So then I'll just rotate that into place. Cool, and I think that's looking pretty good. You can see the legs looking pretty good. And then here, this toe is not rotated as much. Maybe something like that. And then I'm going to take this, kind of match that heel up as close as I can. And then we'll rotate that down a bit. Take that forward a little bit. So that toe's not quite bent that much. Cool. So now I've got my feet roughly in place. And so now let's move up to our hips. And so for our hips, I'm going to have my hips essentially -20 is actually okay for the Y, right? So the Y is okay. I might take that Z and if I click and drag on that, I can actually rotate that a little bit here too. So I'm going to rotate that to -5, just a hair, right? It was like -4, so I'm just moving that just a hair. And then I'm going to come up to my spine 1. And I'm going to rotate this forward a little bit till about 11. And then I'm going to come to the spine 2. And for spine 2, that's actually probably okay for spine 2. And then for the neck, if you remember, it needs to be the opposite of whatever we have on spine 1 and spine 2. So I'm going to click on spine 1. I can see rotate X is 11. I'm going to click on this, so rotate X needs to be -11. Click on spine 2, rotate 5. This needs to be rotate -5, and it is. Okay, cool. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just come to the arms and get those into rough position. Just kind of rotate that. Rotate that a little bit. And I'm also watching over here too, right? And you can rotate over here a little bit if you want as well. Rotate that a little bit. As you can see, it's not perfect, but that's okay. And so we'll just rotate that. As close as we can. And rotate that. And rotate that. And essentially, that's pretty good. So at this point for frame 17, I think we're good to make another keyframe. And so now be careful, we made a second button. You don't want to click this right now. You want to come here where it says select curves, and you want to click on that button. Okay, and we're going to click S to set a keyframe. So on frame 17, and now we've made frame 17. And so now we just need to reduplicate that process that we just did. Okay, but for frame 21, 25, and 29, we don't need to do 33 because essentially we've already got the pose for 33 on 1, and I'll show you how to get that on 33 when we get there. Okay, so at this point, we need to now do frame 21. But before we move on, I don't want a bunch of wireframe guys, so I'm going to come here to frame 17 layer. I'm going to click the V, and I'm going to hide that because we no longer need that little dude. And I'll click off the layers, or the curves. Okay, so frame 21, what we need to now do is we need to now come and click onto frame 5, right? In this little blue, I can find the blue guy and then find the frame. Okay, so frame 5, and now I'm going to click that second button. Cool. And now I can click back on frame 21. And that's showing me the pose that I need in frame 21. So let's go ahead and make a little layer for that. So we have him selected. We're just going to come and click this little button again. Double click it here, and we'll call this FRM 21 underscore capital LYR. And save. And now we have a layer for that. And then we just need to come in here and click that last little box one time. Again, if you click it again, you can always just cycle back through until you get to the T, and then just click off. And now we're ready to start working on this next pose and use that wireframe for help on that. So again, I tend to start at the bottom. So I'm going to come and I'm going to grab this right here. And then for the translate Y on that one, I want to move that down a little bit more, right? So, we do need to move this as well. So before we do that, let's keep everything moving along really clean. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to match that up. Okay, so frame 21, frame 21. Okay, now let's keep moving on. And so I'm going to select this circle, and I'm going to push it down. And I'm going to push it down to something like that. So we'll round that to -4. Okay, and then for that, since we are starting to come towards this leg a little bit, we would want to push this over, right? Because we're starting to put weight onto that leg. And so let's round that to 1. Okay. And I think that's looking good. So now let's match the feet up. And so I'm just going to zero out that rotation. Cool. And I'm just going to move that into place. Cool. And then on this, I'm going to zero out that rotation. And then I'm going to take, so I zeroed out the toes rotation. Now I'm going to come to the ankle, rotate that a little bit. I'm going to move that into place. Cool, so that's looking pretty good, I think. And so now we want to come up to our hips, and we want to start working on our hips a little bit. And so for our hips, we want to take this negative y, and we just want to start rotating that in so that it's not quite as far. And so we'll do like a -10. So you can click out here and move things here, but just FYI, you can also click and drag over here too. Okay. And so -10 on the y, I think it's going to look okay for that. And then for the z, let's back off that -5 a little bit. So we'll just do like a -4. And so essentially we're starting to translate or starting to put some weight onto this hip. So we want it to start rotating like that just a little bit. Okay. Cool. So now let's go to spine 1. And if you think about it, he just came down, right? So there's going to be a lot of weight coming down. So you're going to want to bend this a little bit more. And so that's going to be about 15. Boom. And then for our spine 2, we're going to want to back off, right? Because same thing with that hip, we're going to want to back off that rotation. We're going to want to back off of this rotation just a hair, right? Because he's starting to swing back the other direction, okay? And with that in mind, let's go ahead and take our arms and start getting those into position. And this is where we're going to use that little guide. Looks like we're a little off here, but that's okay. We can do stuff like that, but okay. Some of this we're going to still adjust in the graph editor anyway, but yeah. Anyway, I think that's pretty good. I mean, you could line that up a bit more, but yeah, that's starting to look okay. And then we'll do our arm. Okay, and just get that into position. Okay. It looks like our hand is rotated just a little bit like that. And that's pretty close. So I think we got everything. We got that. The one thing we didn't get was our neck. So just as a reminder, spine 1, 15. So need to be a -15. So -15. And then we'll check spine 2, and we back that off. So that's 3. So that'll need to be -3. Cool. And so now you can see we've got frame 21 pretty well blocked out. Cool, so let's go ahead and click our first button, right? We're on frame 21, and now we want to select all of our curves. Okay, so we click that button, and then we're going to click S to set a key. Cool, so now we've got even more keyframes in there. Boom. So really, we just need to do 25 and 29, and we're done. So I'm going to click, again, we're just going to rinse and repeat. So I'm going to turn off the visibility for that layer. And now we're ready for frame 25. So first off, let's just go ahead and move this, our image plane. So we're going to match that up just so we kind of keep things working clean. So we are ready for frame 25. And that's red. And I can see red here is 9. So I'm going to go back to frame 9. Okay. So on frame 9, the second I'm on frame 9, I'm going to come up here. I'm going to click that second button, the duplicate object button. So let's click that. And it's going to make a duplicate of our guy. Let's come back immediately to frame 25. And with that selected, let's make a layer for that. So let's click that little guy right there, and let's double click on that, and let's rename this to FRM29 underscore capital LYR for layer. Cool. And now let's click this little button right there to get a transparency wireframe view again. Okay, and so as you can see, we're just starting to rinse and repeat at this point. So let's go ahead and work from the bottom up. So root, I'm going to bring that back up. I'm going to put that to about a negative 0.4. Cool. And then I'm going to just match the feet up. Nice. I can get that curve selected. Rotate that a little bit. And get that in a rough place. Okay, let's go up to our hips and start to work on our hips. So again, we're going to really need to rotate the weight on this. Let's come back down to the root because I can see my guy has shifted over quite a bit, so I think I missed a number here. So which we are, right? As he starts stepping onto that leg, if we look at our center of gravity and pull down, that's going to need to be over that foot. So we need to pull that over on our root to like 2. Okay. And that should start to match that up a little bit. Cool. Alright, so back to the hips. And let's get all that pre-situated. So we'll put our rotate X. So back to 0. And then our rotate Y. We want that to be around a negative 5. Just a little bit of rotation. And yeah, I think that's starting to look good. And then we'll just back that back up to 4. So negative 5 and 4 for that. Okay, so on the spine 1, right, as he came down like that, he would have bent forward a little bit, but this should start straightening back out a little bit, right, as he starts, as he's just in this main position, right. He no longer has that weight momentum pushing down on that spine. So for spine 1, let's put that to like 5, and then spine 2. Let's go ahead and rotate our spine 2. Since this is like the arms are right there at the center, again, we don't really need any rotation, right? Because his arms aren't swinging and like his shoulders aren't going with it quite as much. So we can kind of zero that out. And then for the neck, so if we look at spine 1, that's 5 on X, so that'll need to be negative X or negative 5. And then if on spine 2, right, we zeroed the Y out, so we'll zero that out. Cool. And this is looking pretty good. So now let's just get our arms into position. So I'm going to rotate that a little bit. Rotate that a little bit. And it's all just kind of about matching things up. And rotate that. And rotate that. And it seems like we might be a little too high here. So I'm going to want to pull this down a little bit. Something like that, maybe -1. And yeah, I think that's starting to look okay. Cool. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to match it up as close as you can, right? So it should be generally pretty close. So I might rotate that a little bit more. And then that hand. That wrist better. All right, cool. So he's matching up pretty well on frame 25. So again, we'll come and we'll click our little select curves button. And we're on frame 25, 25. Click the little select curves button. Click S to set a keyframe. And so now we are ready to make essentially our last pose that we have to block out. So I'm going to turn off frame 29. And let's go ahead and just move all this. Let's keep it all nice and clean. So let's get 29 matched up, and that's green. And so we find the green one, and that's frame 13. So we're going to go back to frame 13 for a second, and then we're going to click that second button. And then from there, we're going to immediately go back to frame 29. And with this guy selected, we're going to click this little button, and we're going to rename this layer to frame 29, and then underscore capital LYR. And oh, we misnamed this layer. That needed to be 25. Okay. FRM 29 underscore capital LYR. Cool. All right. So from this point, we need to turn that to transparency mode. Click off, and we are ready to do our last pose. Okay, so essentially, again, I tend to work from the ground up. So I'm going to come here, and I want to grab the root, and this is going to need to go up. And so I want to move this up on our Y from about -1 to like 1. Okay. And then let's move this back. And rotate that. And actually, the other curves are kind of getting in the way, so I want to get back to here. Rotate it like that, so to speak. And let's go ahead and pull that leg forward because it's kind of blocking my view right there. So maybe work on the right leg for a second. Cool. And so now we can do like that. Yeah. That's pretty close. So let's go ahead and work our hips a little bit. So on our hips, let's get this rotation right here. Let's set that to 20. Okay, and then for our Z rotation, that's probably okay. I need to bring this down a hair. One. Just gonna match that up as best we can. Okay, so I think that's looking okay. Let's put that back to 1. I'm just kind of trying to find what's going to work the best for these knees. Yeah, essentially I think we're going to have to come down here. So I'm probably getting off my notes a little bit here, but that's okay. Pull that forward a little bit. See if we can put that back to work. Yeah, it's really wanting to lock that knee, so I don't want that knee locked, so I'm pulling it down a hair, because, again, if that pops, we're not going to like that. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving on. Okay, so for spine 1, we want to, so he's shooting up, so we'll get a little bit of weight curve right there, right? So he'd bend forward a little bit as his momentum goes back up, right? That spine would bend a little bit. And then for spine 2, we want that to be on our Y. We're going to want it to bend a little in that direction. So like -5, yep, -5. And so now let's do our neck. So if I click on spine 1, that's 8. So this would need to be -8. And then this is -5, so Y would need to be the 5. Cool. That's looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and get the arms situated. So we're going to rotate those until they start matching up with that wireframe. That's probably pretty close. That. And then we can do a little bit of that wrist if need to be. Now let's go get this arm. Rotate that into that position. And I think that looks, well, pretty good for our final pose. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to click our select curves, right? Because we're on 29, we're on 29, and we're going to click select curves, and then we're going to click S to set a keyframe. Okay, and now I'm going to turn off this. And now we have a basic walk cycle locked out. Okay, so the last thing for this week is I want to show you how to get frame 33 back in place. So if I go to frame 1, okay, and if I click the select curves button, it's going to give me all my curves. Okay, I've got all my curves selected. I'm on frame 1. I'm going to right click down here, okay, and I'm going to come up to copy. Okay, so we got all the curves selected, and then we come to frame 1, and then we right click and copy. And then I'm going to come to frame 33. I've still got all my curves selected. I'm just going to do right click. I'm going to go to paste and paste. And so now if I click on frame 33 and I click on frame 1, you're not going to see anything different. Okay? And we do need this here because when we get into interpolation, right, we do want this to be able to start blending back into this first pose. Okay? And so at this point, we now have a blocked out walk cycle. Okay, and there might be some things that we need to do to fix this. Like one of the most like notorious things that you'll see is like as this guy walks, like his arms don't go straight back and forth, right? They come out to the side and then back and that sort of stuff. And that's stuff that we can fix in our graph editor. Okay. And so yeah, at this point I think we're looking pretty good. And so for next week, we're going to get into doing interpolations and that sort of stuff and smoothing this out a little bit more. But at this point, you've got a walk cycle blocked out. All right, cool.